Let me first do a shout out to the parking team. It's 10 degrees out there and windy. Yep. They are out there. It's miserable. I talk to them when they come in and they're just, their face is frozen. So we appreciate them doing what they do, even though, it's easy to get mad at them because they're telling you where to go. You don't want to go. They're just trying to help the situation, and it matters that when they're out there versus when they're not out there. Just try that. That's no fun. You may have heard this joke before. A man is in his car and he gets a phone call from his wife and she says, "Honey, be careful. I heard on the radio there's a car going the wrong way on the highway." And he says back breathlessly, "It's not just one car, it's hundreds of them." What makes that joke work is the power of imagination. You didn't see it, but your mind created an image, and when you get the image going, you imagine the scene. It's funny. And it's one of those things where imagination is how you're going to determine to live your life, what you're going to pursue in life, what you want in life, what you think will satisfy you. That all happens in your imagination, the power of your imagination. So what do you think of? What comes to your mind when you envision who Jesus is? What comes to your mind? When you imagine what your life would be if you had a life where you had connection with Jesus. You were living a life with Jesus. You have a connection with Jesus. What comes to your mind when you think about that? Is that something desirable? Is that something that you think is going to bring more scarcity in your life, make your life less? Your answers to those things are your imagination. How you envision that reality. What do you think of this statement here by Ray Ortlund Sr.? He says, "Half-hearted Christians are the most miserable people of all. They know enough about God to feel guilty, but they haven't gone far enough with Jesus, with Christ, to be happy." Do you see yourself anywhere in that paragraph? I know in my earliest years as a Christian, that completely described me. I knew enough to be guilty, and I was doing a lot of the same kinds of things that my non-Christian friends were doing, and I felt guilty. They seemed not bothered by it at all, and I was jealous of them. I almost thought, gosh, it's worse to be a Christian than a non-Christian. If you want happiness, don't be a Christian. If you had a happiness-o-meter and you were able in some way to measure my happiness as a Christian, early years of my life, in teen years, college years, and my non-Christian friends, I guarantee you their happiness-o-meter was higher than mine. But then I discovered over time, always a two-step forward, one step back kind of process, these things. But I discovered the secret of living a life connected with Jesus. Having a connection with Jesus that was beginning to describe my life, make me aware of my life in that kind of way. It's how I imagine my life. It's connected with Jesus. And there's a difference between having life with Jesus rather than just knowing stuff about Jesus. Have you discovered that secret yet in your life? 1,000 years before Jesus was born, there was a king named David, Jewish king, King David. You may have heard of him. 1,000 years before Jesus was born, he was in a circumstance that caused him to write a poetic worship of God. We call it Psalm 63. And in that poetic worship of God, there's an ancient heading that when you read your Bibles and you get to the Psalms, sometimes at the beginning of certain Psalms, there's like a description in italicized lettering describing the circumstances of that Psalm. And those are as old as the Bible itself. Those aren't like your publisher's notes. Those go all the way back to the earliest copies of the Bible that we have. And the one for Psalm 63 describes this psalm, David's circumstance when he wrote this psalm, this way. It says, "A psalm of David when he was in the wilderness," or you could translate that desert. That's what the wilderness is around Judah. When he was in the wilderness of Judah. If you know the story of David, he had to go there various times in his life when he was running from enemies. We know from verse 9 in the psalm, he's running from an enemy who's trying to kill him. And so he has taken refuge in the desert. It was kind of a home turf for him in lots of ways because that's where he hid from Saul and those kinds of things. Maybe this is that circumstance, we don't know. But in that desert, he is unbelievably thirsty, like anybody would be. Where's he gonna get water? Does he have enough water? And an image comes to his mind. Actually, that creates an image in his mind of his soul. That he has this soul that is thirsty for God. Now let me ask you this. If you were in that situation, would you pray? If you were in the wilderness running from somebody who's trying to kill you? My guess is you would. But what would you pray? Here's the first thing David prays. Verse 1, he says, "Oh God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water." Now what David's doing here, he's seeing his desert surroundings, not just physically, but spiritually. It's a picture to him of his intense thirst for God. It's a description really of every human soul has this intense thirst for God, but they don't always know it. And it's an intense thirst for God that's in a dry and weary land where there is no water. A dry and weary land, a desert where there is no water is David's description spiritually. It's his description soulishly of his life. He is thirsty for God. He recognizes that, but what often people don't recognize is that, but everybody's in a spiritually place like a dry and weary land where there is no water. Now we know from watching movies and TVs, our mind begins to play tricks on us, or at least that's what we see in movies and TVs. When you're thirsting in a desert, when you're thirsting in a dry and weary land where there is no water, our mind plays tricks and we begin to see the sun's rays off the hot, dry sand. Or none of us has probably been in the desert where we've seen that. But if you drive on the interstate in Kansas in the hot summer, that's what you're gonna see. You're gonna see up ahead, is that a body of water? Am I driving toward water? You see the sun's rays off the hot pavement and it looks like a pool of water way up there. That's a mirage in the desert. It looks like a pool of water way up there as the sun reflects off the hot sand. And we see TV shows where, sometimes comedies or whatever, where the character is thirsty, they see the water, what they think is water, and they're running and they get there and they dive into a pile of sand. David's imagining his soul's thirst for God. But the problem is, in a spiritual desert, our mind plays tricks on us and we see mirages. Our mind begins to see what looks like the water our soul thirsts for. Our mind begins to see, even though our thirst is for God, if we don't know that, we're in a dry and weary land where there is no water, and that includes us. It includes us being sort of unaware of what our thirst is for. And so we see mirages. We see God substitutes, you might say. Things that we think are gonna satisfy this thirst. And so we run toward them and we think we get them and then we eventually realize we're just as miserable as we were before we had them. We might even become more cynical, even more miserable as a result. And as the older you get, then the more your face just has this look of cynicism, the more your face has this look of just unfulfilled longings. Because that's the condition of the human soul. We see this, I'm not gonna go into all the cliches. We've quoted Tom Brady or Jim Carrey, or we can quote all kinds of famous people who get the recognition, the winning, the wealth, the success, the romance, the relationship, all these people that get that ultra of what it is we think would make a person happy, and then they realize they're just as miserable, if not more miserable than before. And we see that over and over again, whether it's success or their marriage, and then they get divorced 3 years later, or all these Hollywood divorces, or all the ways that people thought they could get if they got the money, if they got the success, that would satisfy their soul, and it doesn't. Because see, David says, no, our thirst is for God. And we're in a dry and weary land where there is no water. A woman named Maven Haran, I don't know if I pronounce her name correct, Maeve Haran, in the Daily Mail a while back, she wrote this: "Why aren't I happier?" Sometimes seems the anthem of our age. Why aren't I happier? We look for happiness everywhere, through work, success, through our choice of partner, and even in our home. And when we don't find it, we turn to shrinks, to life coaches, even to TV makeover shows. It's the great contradiction of our times. We have a better lifestyle, more holidays, newer cars, and more disposable income than any previous generation, yet we're unhappier than ever, with a constant stream of statistics about stress, depression, loneliness, and even suicide. It's a legitimate question, right? We really do have more than any culture in human history. There's no question about it. And yet, I think she's right. Statistically speaking, it just seems like we're less happy perhaps than generations that have gone before us. Why aren't we happier? My guess is it's because of all this. We have more mirages available to us. We have more things that we think, if I had that, that's what would make me happy. A good example of this is a sitcom a few years ago called The Good Place. I'm getting ready to ruin the show for you to some degree, but that's on you if you haven't watched it yet. It's been out for a while. And even if I ruin it for you, it's still worth watching. It's written by non-Christians for sure. It's blatantly anti-Christian, and yet their observations about things are quite genius. In the show, it's these four main characters who have gone to the afterlife after they die. They've died and they've gone to the afterlife. And the first person they meet, Ted Danson, and he's an angel, and they ask, am I in the good place? He says, yes, you're in the good place. What they don't know is that what they think are angels are actually demons. They're not in the good place, they're in the bad place. And the demons are trying to torment them by giving them what they've always thought they wanted, what they expected to be something that would make them happy, and to build their expectations up, and then to torment them psychologically by the disappointment of unfulfilled expectations. That's their torment. So the first thing they do is introduce them to their soulmate. This is the person they say that you are aligned with. This is your soulmate. And they begin the relationship in the good place, so they think, with their soulmate, only to surprisingly discover the surprisingly frustrating things about their soulmate. They're not so compatible always. This person's not fulfilling me the way I would expect my soulmate to fulfill me. Or they also, after the soulmate thing, they give them a house. This is a house. This is for you, built for you. This is where you are now in the good place. This is in your house. This is your house. And as they live in their house, eventually they just notice things that aren't quite right about it, that are kind of disappointing. If I'm going to be given a house in heaven, do I have to duck when I enter a room? Things like that are just not quite right about the house. And they become disappointed in the unfulfilled expectations. They try to satisfy them with food, and this is the best food in the good place. And so they eat ice cream and all these meals, and this is going to be a great meal, and it's okay. It's not horrible, but it's not any better than other things that I've had, and there's some things about it that are kind of not so awesome. And these demon characters, again, characters think they're angels, keep saying, we want you to be happy. We want you to be happy. And the reason they keep saying that is to continue to build their expectations that these are things that should make you happy. And when they experience the unfulfilled expectations, the disappointment of the unfulfilled expectations, that's what's psychologically starting to torment them, slowly over time. And I think that's something particularly genius about the show. Because see, if I were a demon, that's exactly what I would do. If I were a demon in this world and I wanted to mess you up, I wanted to torment you, I wanted to keep you from the water that your soul really thirsts for, I'm gonna keep showing and throwing mirages your way. I just want you to be happy. Your soulmate. This house will do it. All this food, the best food, the job, the success, the wealth, the looks, the clothes. I just want you to be happy. And I would keep throwing things at you to be a mirage to keep you from starting to think maybe that it's something different that your soul really thirsts for, longs for, that's for God. As long as you have these mirages and chasing one mirage after another, you're not gonna stop and think, was my soul created for something more? Is it something more that I really am thirsting after? Now, one of the most repeated images all throughout the Bible is this idea of water, that God is the fountain of living water, he says in Jeremiah chapter 2. That this water, this what David is thirsting for, I thirst for you, O God, my God, in a dry and weary land where there is no water. Jesus comes onto the scene and he says, that water is gonna make you thirst over and over and over again, but I am the living water. The water you drink from me will well up into you for eternal life, with eternal satisfaction. And you see this whole image all the way through, and I think it's kind of amazing that the Bible, thousands of years old, speaks so contemporarily to our situation now. So that even all throughout the Bible, from the very beginning all the way through to the very end, the last chapters of the Bible are emphasizing this image as kind of the image that we really have to catch, the imagination in our mind, if we're really gonna catch who Jesus is and what a life connected to him would be like. So the second from last chapter of the Bible, Revelation 21, verse 6, the risen Jesus says this to the Apostle John in a vision. He didn't just appear, he was in a vision. He says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty, I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. See what Jesus is saying in all this imagery. The Alpha and the Omega are the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet. I am everything. I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning and the end. I am the creator of all that exists. All that exists comes from me. I am the source of all existence, and I am the giver of all life, and there is nothing outside of me. I am the spring of living water that you've been thirsting for all your life, and it is infinite. It is infinite, it never runs out, because I am everything. Now we kind of think, gosh, if I lived a life really connected with Jesus, my life would be less, because Jesus is scarcity. Jesus doesn't have all the other things that I want. Outside of Jesus, that's where abundance is. And Jesus is saying, you can try that, and you'll try that all your life, and you'll always be chasing one mirage after another, because outside of me, there is nothing. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I am the spring of living water. Stop running after mirages. They are not going to satisfy you, because see, here's the thing. The living water you seek is connection with the infinite Jesus forever. And there is nothing outside of him. Going back to the good place, a couple seasons later, again, I'm ruining it for you, but not really. You'll watch it with new insight. Eventually in the last season, they get to the good place. From the bad place, they really are in the good place. And in the good place, quote unquote, again, this show's anti-Christian, written by non-Christian authors. They've got a different agenda, but they're still pretty genius. They're really smart, got some good insights. In this good place, they can do forever, as much as they want, whatever they want. They can have whatever they want for as long as they want, as much as they want. So the one guy who's really wanting to be a learner, likes books, he gets to read all the books ever written. And he just becomes this super smart guy that knows all the philosophers, makes all these quotations. Well, so-and-so says, and so-and-so says. Hey, you know what that is? That he knows all the physics of things. He's this genius because he's had forever in the good place to learn all he wants to learn. They have a romance, and that romance gets deeper, and they have these experiences together, and they're watching sunsets over and over again. They can go anywhere in creation and watch a sunset. They can go anywhere on earth and have this experience, a waterfall, whatever it is. They can have entertainment, all they want, all the entertainment they want, all the food they want, all this food without getting fat. They can just kind of keep eating, and they get to do all the things that we think, if I had more of that, I would be happier. The one thing missing is God. There's no God. And so maybe after 1,000,000 years, we don't know. This could be a really long time later when we're starting to get into later episodes. We don't know how many years. They just have kind of done it all. And they've done it over and over. And they get to a point that everything and everybody just starts to become boring. Even their loved ones, there's not a new thing to learn about them. There's not a new experience really to have together. There's nothing really new to talk about. And everything and everyone becomes boring. And eventually they commit suicide in heaven. Isn't that fun? Now here's the thing, is that, again, this is their non-Christian authors. I don't know what they're trying to do, but they're obviously trying to make heaven seem like that's not really the hope that you think it is. It's kind of a stupid idea because it really wouldn't be the thing you think. But I think it backfires because I think it shows that if you had all the mirages you want, but you don't have connection with the infinite God, all these things become a kind of hell. The good place became a kind of hell that they wanted to escape. And that's true in our lives now. If you go from mirage to mirage and you get all the stuff, you get all the money, you get all the success you want, all the romance, all the sunsets, all the vacations, all the experience. Let's just say you just pile it on. Without connection to the infinite God, all of these things eventually become a kind of hell. And we become tormented with the disappointment of unfulfilled expectations more and more in our lives. That Jesus keeps trying to say who he is, giving you images, the living water, the bread of life that never runs out. He had 5 loaves and he fed thousands of people. It never ran out. They picked up more than they started with. And everybody was filled, satisfied is the word used. I am the bread of life. It will never run out if you have connection with me. I'm the best wine, save for last, and it never runs out if you are connected with me. I'm the living water that will finally quench your thirst infinitely, and it will never run out if you're connected to me. All these things don't have to be mirages. They can be things you enjoy. They could be good gifts, but you have connection with me for the thirst that you have in your soul for me. And these things don't become God's substitutes, they just become blessings. You know what it is? You're not going to want to have a life connected with Jesus if Jesus hasn't captured your imagination. If Jesus is boring to you, your problem's not you need more information, you need more imagination. So imagine. What comes to your mind what image comes to your mind when you envision who Jesus is? I'm not talking about a face. I'm talking about what Jesus said, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, living water, the bread of life. Somebody who will satisfy and it will never run dry. What comes to your mind when you think of Jesus? What comes to your mind when you think of your life if you lived your life in connection with Jesus? That you were just living life with Jesus, more and more being connected with Jesus. Because you're not going to want to pursue Jesus over other things if your image of Jesus is less than the other things. It's not going to happen. You're not gonna wanna pursue Jesus over other things if your image of your life, if you did, is scarcity and less than it would be if it's not gonna happen. You may not have an information problem. You might just have an imagination problem. Can you imagine this? Can you imagine a life lived in this life, in this world, that begins in this world? Eternity for sure, but it begins now, Jesus clearly says, where you're more and more living a life of connection with Jesus. That's, well, like David said, it's quenching his spiritual thirst. Oh God, you're my God. Earnestly I seek you. And more, you're just living this life, envisioning the reality of living life with Jesus. Jesus present with you, Jesus present in you. So here's the thing. You're not going to live a life of connection with Jesus without connecting with Jesus. So what we want to do is do a sermon series. We're going to start it next week. A sermon series on prayer. We're going to for sure answer questions that you submitted, not all of them, but a lot of the questions you submitted over a couple months ago. But we're also, our hope is to help us learn what it means to really begin to experience a life lived with Jesus, to have this, to show that it's both possible and powerful to have this kind of connection with Jesus in our prayer life. I hope you join us.